What's going on, everyone? This is Benjamin Nowak live with my man, Mr. Caleb Bell from BassQuest. Smallmouth, river, largemouth hammer right now, man. You're catching giant bags. And what we're going to be talking tonight is river fishing, cold water reservoir fishing, whether you're fishing inland lakes or river systems or wherever you guys are fishing, cold water, current-driven bodies of water, and how to approach these fish. And this is going to be a full breakdown seminar style of podcast live stream. And we're going to talk about the when, where, why, and the gear that we're using to catch these fish, to give you everything you need to know about how to catch fish in current-driven reservoirs and bodies of water. And Caleb Bell is the man that lives down on TVA. And, man, give us a little introduction about yourself for the people that don't know who you are.
My home lake is Chickamauga. My other home lake, I guess I live right on the border of Chickamauga and Nickajack Lake, which are two of the better lakes, I feel like, on the Tennessee River chain. Obviously, Chickamauga is known for huge, like really giant fish, but Nickajack is an old school hammer lake that's kind of a sleeper. It's kind of fallen out of the public domain, but full of giant bass, largemouth and smallmouth. Many fish, over 8 pounds, 7 and 8 pound smallmouth come out of there every year. A few of them actually last year were right on the 9 pound mark as far as smallmouth goes. Several 10-pound largemouth come out of that lake, and there was even one that was almost 13 that was caught, I believe, last year or the year before.
So what happened with Nickajack, right? Because Nickajack essentially, even 10 years ago was the place, and Chickamauga sucked, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sucked, but it was kind of more of a sleeper for the guys that weren't.
I think the main thing that changed, Nickajack never got bad. There was, it never changed. It has been a great lake since then. It continues to be a great lake. But I think Chickamauga came on so strong as far as dropping giant fish. Like the amount of double digits that come out of Chickamauga is still just ridiculous for where we are as far as in relation to the equator. You know what I mean? Like you think about big fish, bodies of water, you think about like Mikey's 13-pounder down in Florida, that was awesome, wasn't it?
Dude, that is insane, man. I watched the video and I was like,
that's what I'm asking.
My word, dude. 13 and 5, man.
I haven't seen the video yet. It came out while I was on the water today.
Dude,
so
it is unbelievable, man. Like, yeah. I got chills the whole time watching it, especially when he dumped some big fish at the beginning. I'm like, he's dumping 9-pounders. I'm like getting a little bit frustrated, but yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing, like, turn this where I can actually see myself a little bit. So Chickamauga came on so strong that I think it kind of overshadowed a lot of the other really good lakes in the area. Like we've talked about in the past, Parksville is a hammer lake over here, talking 6-7 pound spotted bass come out of there routinely. So I'm blessed to be in an area where there's a lot of big trophy fish and every species of fish within an hour from me. And so I get to chase these things around and learn a lot about really big fish behavior because there's enough of them around that you catch enough to kind of get an idea of what they're doing. You get to track these fish around. It's kind of like hunting big bucks or something, Today there's a bunch of guys out practicing for a BFL, and everyone I talked to had either not caught any fish or hadn't even caught a 5-fish limit. And we were out there with live shad, and of course, ended up with right at 39 pounds, I think, with 5 and 11-pounder, an 8-pounder, 2 7s.
That is ridiculous.
And a 6-pounder. And my dad, he lost another one that was a freaking mega. It's like we had a chance again to be in the mid-40s as far as the bag goes.
So, like, what you're doing out there, obviously with live bait, it's a little bit different. There were some questions from people asking, why are you doing it? But before we touch on that, like, you and Cole are doing some cool stuff out there right now.
Oh yeah. And see, we've been fishing artificial up there a lot right now. The jerkbait bite's coming on strong. I see everyone's been plunking rigs out there, but that bite really hasn't popped off in the last couple years. It's almost like it's kind of lost its luster. If you go down anywhere on the Tennessee River chain this time of year, from about January to March, everyone's you hear that, the sound I'm talking about. Like that big splash. Like it's not a swim bait, it's a dang Alabama rig that's going out there. And I think the fish have really kind of gotten off of that and gotten on the single swim bait really good. Like a 5 to 6 inch swim bait. They're on that crankbait. That's another sleeper bait. I don't know why everyone just forgot about a mid range flat side crankbait.
Yeah, dude.
Tide has come on like crazy around here, and a few of the hammers know about it and are catching megs on it, but the jerk bait's kind of been the deal. And that's really what I'm targeting with these really big fish that we're catching on live shad. I'm fishing them below a large, like a stick float, basically, the slip float, about 5 foot deep. And these fish are sitting in 12 to 14, 15 foot of water, and they're looking up. So they're, it's a perfect situation for a jerk bait or a floating fly, something that needs to stay in the strike zone. It needs to stay close to where these fish are sitting because they're in the current seam, right? They don't want to have to swim out very far. They don't want to have to chase. So you need something that, the rig and a swim bait, a lot of times it pushes through that strike zone too quickly. Whereas those fish, they want to be down there deep. They want to look up and see that thing, and they want to pin it against the surface. Or they want to go, lazily swim up there and get a chance at it. If it goes too quickly by the strike zone, it's over. It's like you're not even there. But the one exception to that is cranking. You can get down there and bump one of them and cause a reaction by it.
So you're fishing, are you trying to hit bottom with crankbait, or are you kind of fishing up? I mean, I know this is
so you're burning that thing. What you're doing is you're throwing literally. See, the way this works, and we can go back to talking about like the river system itself. So Chickamauga is a very interesting fishery. If you get on the south end of the lake, it's really wide. And what happens is the current disperses right there. So it fishes like the bottom end of Chickamauga below Sequoia fishes very similar to a lake. You know what I'm talking about? Just like an upland reservoir, a typical lake. It doesn't fish like a Tennessee River chain as much. A lot of those fish are not as current oriented. They don't have to be. However, when you get to the mid-lake, which the mid-lake is kind of my bread and butter, it has been for years, those fish, it's wide enough. You've got all these flats and things so that you've got current and you've got back seams coming on the back sides of, secondary channels that are coming on there. So you still get the current, but you also have areas where fish can thrive without being as current oriented. Now, the key right now is going really far upriver. And what happens this time of year, we get a drawdown here on all these Tennessee River lakes. Everyone's different. I think Watts Bar, it draws down quite a distance, like we're talking like 15 to 18 feet. Chickamauga only draws down 6 to 7 feet. Nickajack only draws down 6 to 7 feet. And so what happens is on the middle part of the Chickamauga and the low end of Chickamauga, we have huge feeder creeks. And so in big flats.
Give us some names. Give us some name drops on these feeder creeks. So if someone was looking at a map.
Yeah, big creeks like Sail Creek, Saudi Creek, Chester Frost, Harrison Bay is Wolf Teever, those kind of mega creeks there. And not only that, but like these big expansive flats that I'm talking about where the old river channel was flooded, there's large secondary channels that are on the back sides of these flats. And so what that does is it spreads the fish out. So on the middle part of the lake and the low end right now, you can go into the backs of creeks and catch fish. You can go towards the very mouths of creeks, catch fish. You can run up secondary channels and catch fish, and you can catch them on the outside edges on the actual like ledge fishing places that you would fish during the summertime. So that makes things confusing. Now, if you go all the way upriver, before you get to the Tailrace, the river necks down, and it has flats on there, and it has creeks, but the creeks are so shallow that the fish can't get back into them. So the drawdown causes all the fish to funnel to the main lake. And that's
way up river, you're saying.
Yeah. And the further you go, the better. Anywhere from Watts Bar Dam all the way down to Hiawassee, Highway 60 is kind of the key this time of year if you're really wanting to funnel fish in, and it's just predictable. They have one place they can sit. And so what they do is they get on these outside and inside channel bands. So, it's dropping off. I'm casting into 3 foot of water, and it drops off a little bit, and then it will shelf down to like 30 feet.
Yep.
Those fish ride what's called a pellow. It's where the current is hitting an object. It's just like a trout stream. If you think about a rock, on the backside of a rock has an eddy, right?
Yep.
You've got dead water behind that. Now, the front side of the rock has dead water too. And a lot of people don't realize that. If you want to catch really big fish, you want to learn that.
Yeah,
because
so that's called the push.
The current pushes back and it creates a seam. So an active big fish can sit there and dominate that area and have first dibs on everything. And so the entire run of these turns is a seam. right there where that current's pushing into there, it's creating a dead water, and you can really see it the more current they're pushing. That's one thing that you got to learn, you know, on these river systems, they're not always pushing the same amount of current. So you have to figure out how to adapt, you know, if they're running 20,000 CFI or whatever they call it, or if they're running 100,000.
Yeah.
But the more they're running, the more you can see this. It'll actually create a reverse eddy on the shallow part of the bank there. And you can be running down below a dam, you know, and be doing 3 miles an hour or 4 miles an hour in the current, get hung with a crankbait and turn and put yourself on the bank, and it'll push you back to your crankbait. It's so strong.
That's crazy, dude.
So
that's kind of insane. Like, we're talking like super in-depth stuff, which is like, for the people that are listening, whether on podcasts or in the live stream, if you guys have any questions, I mean, because some of the stuff Caleb is saying too is kind of like, I get it, but unless you visually see it, like I've been on a boat with Caleb, I fished fast moving current with Caleb, it can be kind of hard to understand. So if you have any questions, hit us up with questions. We'll be sure to try and, you know, answer your questions, and we'll dive and nitpick a little bit more as we keep going on. But like, man, just your talk. What?
I said it's something I really recommend. You can learn this on a lot of different bodies of water. You know, we think about the Tennessee River system, but just around you know, there's tons of little creeks and rivers over there, and learning a better way to read those areas. It really, if you want to learn how to do this, get on the small creeks and stuff. Yeah. When you see it visually, you can expound upon it, and it'll actually help you way down on these lakes that have reservoirs that do have current, where you can't even see that, but you know, based on what you've seen before, what is happening in the water.
Well, like I saw
your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like that day that you and I fished that Tittabawassee River on Sanford, right? Which we're going to pull up that map. Yeah. You can physically see the two waters. Like, you obviously had 2 feeder creeks, water flowing into both. You could see the dead water in the shallow section where it flowed around the turn, right? And we were saying, okay, well, here's the line, because this is where that slack water is, and these predators, these big bass, can sit in that slack water.
Exactly.
You know, whether it's behind, I think it was a stick that day, or it was like a gravel bar. And you can definitely see it as you get on these smaller bodies of water.
Yeah. And just learning, you know, the more that you're out there, that's the cool thing about, to me, fishing a river, is that it's a constantly changing body of water. You know, you're not going out there and just hitting the same point and everything. You know, that point might not have any water on it when you go back over there. So learning where the fish sit, depending on what the water level is, depending on how much current is going, you're constantly having to evolve and fish exactly what's going on at that moment. And the cool thing is, too, I feel like you have a better chance at catching really big fish. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, those fish don't get to sit in one area and watch baits go by. You know, I feel like a lot of these like reservoir type lakes, like upland reservoirs and stuff, these fish, they hunker down in an area and they don't have, you know, they'll sit there for weeks, especially in the winter months like right now. And they get to see those baits presented the same way over and over. So your chances of fooling that fish, I feel like, are a lot lower, especially when you're talking about the fish that I want to catch. You know, I want to catch a trophy fish. I want to catch, you know, 10-pound largemouth. I want to catch 7-pound smallmouth, 7-pound spotted bass. So that's the ones that I'm after. When you get in a river system, the nice thing is those fish are constantly having to adapt to their environment. So you might go through an area one day and, you know, you present your bait and they're like, I don't know about that. And then the next time there's a little bit more current, that bait whips by a little bit quicker and you get a reaction strike. And I feel like it forces a lot of really big, mature fish to make a mistake that they wouldn't normally make if they were just in a, you know, like a regular lake or a pond or something like that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously you're fishing these bodies of water year round, but like so let's start to talk about, like, when are you really focusing on the river bite? Like, when are you obviously current's a huge factor when you're on a reservoir all season long, right? Summertime, you want current to get these fish active or activated, but when are you pushing way up in the rivers? I mean, obviously we're talking cold water situations. So
me, I like the middle part of the lake. I like the flats. I like the major creeks, having access to those throughout like the spawn period. I really like to fish those areas. Now, you swap around. So this is a perfect time during the drawdown when it's cold. It is the perfect time, perfect conditions to target tailrace fish. So when we're talking tail races, we're talking just below the dam, the actual, current that's coming in, whether it's spillways, whether it's turbines, that's your tail race. And usually I don't know if there's a technical like distance from the dam, but to me, when that current starts to peter out and you're not getting just like, when it's not ripping you at 2 miles an hour anymore, you're not in the tail race anymore. That's typically anywhere from 500 yards to 2 miles past the dam. Now, once you get out of that, then to me, you're in the upper part of the river. You're in the far reaches of the river. That's when we're talking about these very small creeks that don't play at all during the winter months when there's a drawdown. So that's
why do tail races play?
Tail races, it is always a great place to catch fish. I don't care what time of the year it is, a tail race will always play. And it's a really fun way to fish. A lot of people are scared to do it. You've got crazy turbulent current. You've got turbines that are going. It's something I recommend. I don't fish in the tail race unless I've got a buddy with me. Okay. You want 2 people in the boat. You don't know if you're going to get knocked out of the boat. If you do, that boat could be gone. It could be pushed away. So having all your gear, all your safety equipment, knowing that all your equipment's working perfectly is essential to do that. However, you don't have to be scared of it either. Turbines, like we have turbines underneath a lot of our dams, and they create current, but they also produce power. And those actually draw from very low at the bottom of the dam. So one nice thing is you're kicking out water, like for instance, on Chickamauga, it's about 60 feet deep that water is pushing out into the Nickajack tail race. It's about, I think, 80 feet deep where Watts Bar comes in the Chickamauga. So you get this cooler water, and it's cool in the summer, but it's warmer in the winter, if that makes sense. It's the most temperate water that you could possibly get. It's highly oxygenated, and it draws tons of bait in every species of fish. That's the fun thing about it. I mean, you can be going down a bank, and almost every time we call it like a tail race slam or whatever you want to call it. You'll catch a striper, white bass, spotted bass, largemouth, and smallmouth. And then you get a bunch of drum, catfish. You never know what you're going to get.
And what's cool about this is it doesn't just play on the TVA. So like what Caleb says about the tail race and dam fishing, it played when he was up here with me as well. I mean, obviously we were fishing a little bit later in the year, but one thing you notice is that water's a lot cooler. So like we were fishing around the spawn, like the pre-spawn period. Main Lake was like 53 degrees, and you start to get up close to this dam, and you're like, man, it's 49 degrees up here. Like the water's crystal clear, 49 degrees. They're not really running any current. And immediately we're like, no, this is wrong. But there's certain times where that water is actually warmer, and that water will attract those fish to it, especially super early in the year. And that's when you run up to them and you fish them. So tail races are great when that water is really cold, like early springtime. Like, man, you and I went and we started fishing, I mean, a little bit downriver from the dam on Sanford. But the big key there was we were close to that faster moving water as opposed to being down.
I think of it similar to, it's like around us, we have a lot of, since limestone bedrock, right? So we have all kinds of cave systems. What that does in a lot of our lakes, I've got over 30 freshwater springs marked on Chickamauga alone, and a ton of them marked on Nickajack. And so a spring can be an amazing place to fish in either the summertime or the winter. And that's the same thing with a tail race. It really, really plays during the time, because it's going to be one temperature. It's just like going into your basement. If you've got a basement that's dug out or something like that, it's one temperature. It's like a root cellar, right?
Yeah.
So when it's really, really cold, if the water temp's 40 everywhere and that spring is 55, it's obviously going to be great, right? If the water temp's 90 and that spring's pumping out 65-degree water, it's always going to be great. So, I mean, that I think that really is the best time for me. Middle of summer into the fall when it's dog days and miserable, and then wicked cold. If the lake's freezing over, great. I will find myself at the tail race.
Exactly. That very consistent water in those extremes, right? That is when you're really going to be focusing on that really fast, heavy moving, current that's flushing it from the dam.
And just if there is a big flood event, that's one thing that always plays. Whenever when I start seeing 60,000, 80,000, 100,000, you can bet my butt's going to be hightailing it to the nearest dam, whether it's Chickamauga or Nickajack Dam. I'm going to be
crazy.
That's that really, and what it does is the same thing we were talking about with the eddies and the pillows. It makes that so you think about where those fish are sitting. It just condenses them. Like they have like only certain areas that they can sit. And so it's just super predictable. And you go down there and you burn a crankbait, or you burn like a 5-inch swim bait, and just hold on tight, because usually it's insane. We've had Cole and I last year, we had a few days like that. They were running 100, and I think they were running 110,000. The water was so high, it ran over the docks, and they have these set docks, concrete docks at the river part, and they have blue roofs, and all you could see was the blue roofs. That's how high the water was.
Dude, that's crazy.
And we were ripping down there, and I think we caught, a keeper smallmouth for us is 18 inches. And in March, they're all like 3+ pounds, right?
Yeah.
17 keepers in like 4 hours.
Dude, that's stupid.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. And that's why you're going to catch me there. That's why every time the current's running, I'm like, Alex, get down here. Get down here.
Yeah. Like, this is the time. And that's what you guys did a couple springs ago, right? A couple springs ago, you were throwing lookless crankbaits over, shallow rock piles.
Yeah.
So, obviously, we're talking cold water, current reservoir fishing. So we're talking typically spring and fall time, right?
Correct.
Let's start to talk
really
about
just the winter and spring. Like the fall, it takes so long for the water to cool down here.
Yeah, for you guys,
it's fun to get the Tailrace and like up in the river until it really starts to drop, because it's really tough. The water is on its way down. It's taking forever to cool, and then you have all this vegetation that's still dying out, so the fish don't know where they want to be.
Yeah.
A lot of times they'll be like, the biggest fish will be where you can't even see. You're watching like 8-pounders blow up in the grass, and you're like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And they're in literally 8 inches of water, and they're like 200 yards back into a grass flat, and the whole thing's like that deep.
Yeah.
There's not a thing in the world you can do. You just got to watch them.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to like our winter, which would be your fall and into the winter. And for us, it's basically like very, very late season fall, winter into the springtime.
Yeah.
So
in the summertime here, like I like to ledge fish, but it's early. Like for us, these ledges get so beat up, and there's so few that the fish really congregate on. Like you get it out of your system by like June, because by July it ain't happening. Like you'll get lucky on a really nasty day. If you get a thunderstorm or something, you might go out there and crush them. But past July, I'm night fishing. And if you want to catch big ones in summer, night fish.
Yeah. Well, and that's really interesting too, because like you guys get so much insane pressure. Temperatures are ridiculous. The ledges, which people know Chickamauga is a ledge lake, man. Like there's not that many good ledges on Chickamauga.
No,
there are.
Really, they like load up with so many fish, like the community holes do.
Yeah.
But it's not like a Kentucky lake where there's 150 areas that hold those fish. It's literally like 12 well-known ones. And Chickamauga, it's like there's 300. Like a really slow day is 300 boats out there. And so they're just going to get beat to death. So I focus on ledges that are in major creeks. And that's one thing that not a lot of people do. Or like a secondary ledge on a secondary channel that runs up a major flat. And you can catch a lot of
weird, sneaky stuff.
Yeah, weird, hooky stuff is like your best chance to. And that's the thing. Like I like where I live, but I also live in an area that's ultra pressured. So I get to constantly experiment. Every time I get in the boat with Ben or like Mikey or something, like, oh my gosh, you think about this way too much.
Great, dude. You are like, the reason I'm so excited to have you on tonight, especially to talk about this current stuff, is not only did I see you do that, but like you think of all this like extremely nuanced stuff. Like we went out. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Yeah. So where I'm going to show you guys is we went out to this lake called Sanford Lake. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, we went out to Sanford Lake, and this is what the area that we were fishing looks like. So if I zoom this thing out, the launch is way down the lake right here, okay, on this big swing. So we ran way up the river, and this was in the springtime. One of the areas that we fished and had a ton of success was right here on this point. And what was happening was the water was still pretty cold, 47 degrees. So these fish were kind of pushing up in this river, but they were using this main flat right here on the end of this point as an ambush area, and you'd have two different currents running down because there's dam upstream here and dam here. So kind of starting to move into the where, right? Like where are you targeting these fish during current, when you're fishing current and cold water reservoirs one of the big things that you kind of opened up my eyes to was how sensitive these fish are to current changes, even when you know where they're located. Like we had these fish pretty dialed in that there was pods of fish that were on this flat, but then there were fish moving up and down the edges of it.
Yeah, exactly. Where are they sitting? How would they be positioned in order to feed? So that way you know where to present your bait. If you've got, you've got two different dams here, basically. So you've got a different amount of current potentially coming out of one creek or the other, and you've also got the potential of different water temperatures. Remember, there was a major difference. We'd get over to the side where the calm water was, and so many guys ran past us up towards the calm water, and that was the cold water. And then we would get over there in the current, and it would bump. I think it was like 3 to 5 degrees, wasn't it? And there was more current, so we knew immediately to turn and throw our baits up where the current was and bring it back, that fast current, because those fish are going to be looking into that to make their move. And then we eventually figured out that we needed to run up there, and that's when we found that area. There's a hole right there, a depression. That's a great area on a small river and a big river. When you have a hole, it creates another underwater structure that's going to slow that current, or it has a dead water where the fish can sit, they can watch, and then they can ambush bait as it goes by. They can pick and choose what they're going to go out and attack. And that day it was a red-eye shad and what was the other one you were throwing? Because we
just throwing a rattle trap,
30, didn't we?
Yeah, sort of red rattle trap. You were throwing that brown mustard, red-eye shad.
Oh yeah, old mustard. Oh, nasty right there. Yeah, that gets it done.
And then you can actually see it. Like, this is really interesting.
You can see exactly where the fish should be. And that's one thing that's cool about map study too, is like guys, you need to be getting on Google Earth, and you need to go up to the history function, and you need to be going back into time, going forward into time, looking at times in any river. There's times of low water, there's times of high water, there's times of clear water, and there's times of murky water. So you keep looking around there, you can see where your mud lines are going to be. It's going to tell you where the warm water is coming out of the muddier creeks, right? It's going to tell you what the structure points are when you can see a clear lower water. And then you can also tell, based off of that, where you're going to be positioning fish when the water's higher as well. So there's tons and tons of stuff that you can learn. Like, just get on the computer, mess around with Google Earth, mess around with your Navionics maps. Hummingbird has maps now. So I've got GARMIN maps and Navionics and Hummingbird Lake Master maps that I can access all from my computer now. And I'm constantly looking, my son's back there. I'm constantly looking through those and seeing, because every map has something that the other one doesn't. There'll be road beds on Navionics that are not on Lake Master. Then there's like a certain way the point lays that's on Lake Master, but not on Navionics. There's so much that you can do before you hit the water that's going to set you up to have the best day of your life.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things about river fishing too is the amount that it changes. You can't it's very hard for us to say, okay, when you go to this body of river or this river, this current driven, system, this is exactly what you have to do. This is exactly where you have to position. And it makes it really hard for us to now be like, where should I be fishing? Well, it's going to depend. Like, is there a bunch of current pushing across this flat? Is that flat calm right now? Is there an eddy, or is there a slick spot? Like,
is there too much current? Is there too little? What's the water depth on that spot now? And that's one thing. As you do it, you'll start making these decisions faster and faster and faster. A lot of times I can pull into areas now. I'm like, nope, doesn't look right. Pull down, nope, doesn't look right. And it might be brand new water. I'm like, okay, I've never had the current running at 35,000. So what the heck do I do now? And you start looking around like, man, the way that comes around this seam now looks like the deal. You go out there and suddenly you're on them. So it's a constantly evolving thing, but I think the best thing I can tell guys to do, and I don't care where you're at in the country, there's little river systems that are going to be loaded with the right kind of fish that you want to catch. And a lot of times they're not pressured compared to a lot of other places. I went up into Little Chickamauga Creek year before last and caught a 9-pounder in the middle of summer, way up, and like you couldn't even get a bass boat up in there. So you don't know what kind of fish are pushing into these areas. So get out, and hopefully you've got some trout streams around you. that's where I would start. Spend some time trout fishing. It's fun to do. Trout are good to eat too. So get out there when you can see it really, when water is knee deep at the most, you learn a whole lot about what it does to your bait. You start throwing the artificial out there and watching how it reacts depending on what part of the current it hits. Then you just extrapolate that. And it's really easy to learn in a tail race, but then you take what you learn from the tail race and you put it into use way down on your ledges. And so you're actually using the same techniques that the same thought process that you're using on stuff that you can visually see down there 30 foot of water where you can't see. And you can tell by the way the map is how that water is going to react, how your bait's going to react to get to that spot. So many guys I see ledge fishing, they'll idle a school and then they think they line up to make a cast and they don't understand that like where they're throwing, that current is washing their bait completely away from the fish. Like it feels like you would think that, the bait's going to come down to that school, but it's not. Like based on the way this point is, it's actually pushing it this way or it's pushing it this way. And you're like, why am I catching anything? Well, you're not even presenting to the fish at all. Oh, I lost you there. You're muted.
Sorry, I had myself muted. I'm trying to find this river. I might not be able to find it. But yeah. No, and that's one of the things. Like I would love to talk about, this is exactly where you need to be looking during these situations. But like you said, man,
Is there any way I can screen share from mine?
Yeah, you should be able to go to the bottom of your page and hit the screen share button.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me see here. I'm going to go over to.
Okay.
Nice. Go to.
Okay, if I'm where this guy's talking, where Pascal's talking, I think it's going to be very hard to break down. Like, I would love to give you guys this is why for me it's very hard to break down a body of water I've never been to. I just don't really truly know, okay, this is, how the water flows. This is where it moves from, where I'd be looking. And to be honest, this is not my forte. This is just something that I do on occasion.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to share mine if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's see here. All right. Entire screen. What should I do? Entire screen application window.
Go entire screen, then application window, or like Chrome tab, and then
Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Hold on a second.
Do
All right. Entire screen application window.
Do you have Chrome tab?
Yeah.
Does that
Chrome.
pop? And then just pick the tab that you want.
Okay, got it. Boom. Can y'all see that?
Okay. Yes, I can.
All right. This is right here is the Chickamauga Dam. All right. So this below there is the Nickajack Tailrace. Now this is a great example of some of the stuff I'm talking about. You see, all right, right over here is going to be your turbines right here. And then there's these points that roll down. If you look closely, you can see right along these edges, you've got inside and outside turns. Now, all of those are going to create current and they're going to create eddies. The same thing with this massive wing wall behind this bridge here. All right. And then you've got these are actually big, like, that's better. These are big barrels that are out there right here. But what happens is you've got current that comes from here, rolls down through here, and you've got an eddy that's created at the end of the wing wall there. You've got eddies that are created on these rock piles down through here, and then the current will impact at some point down this bank. All those are excellent areas to fish, and depending on the current and the water level, the fish will be in different areas, and so you can really get a feel for that. Now, if I zoom out, we can see Chickamauga, and this is what I was talking about. So on the low end, you can see the main river channel, but you see how wide the lake is. that river channel is not as, or the fish are not as affected by current. You've got these massive channels that run back. This is what I call a secondary channel into these bays and things. And then you've got, let me zoom out, major creeks such as Chester Frost. We can push up the lake here and it should be Saudi Creek. But what I want to do is I want to show you guys. So that's Sail Creek, Possum Creek. If we push up above this point into Hiwassee, look how narrow this river gets. Can you hear me, Ben? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, I mute myself when I'm not on there. And
All right, gotcha. Let's see here. Boom. All right, let's see here. I don't know what happened here. For some reason, there we go. You still got me here?
Yeah, I do.
For some reason, my screen froze there. But anyway, so I hope y'all can see that. But up at the upper part of the river there, it's much narrower. And that's what I was talking about. So those big inside and outside bends is where those fish are going to be sitting. And the funny thing about it is, when we think about fishing structure on the Tennessee River, we think about shell beds, hard bottom. We think about fishing, brush piles and things like that. These fish are not related to anything other than current. It's literally mud bottom in a lot of places these fish are sitting in. So that's one thing to keep in mind too is current on a river fishery, current is king. It doesn't matter necessarily. Those fish don't really care if they're sitting in on a beautiful looking shell bed, if they're sitting on a row of stumps, on a piece of standing timber, on an old brush pile. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is the current has to hit right so they can rest, but also effectively feed. That's all they really care about.
Yeah, what I find really interesting, just about seeing that on a map, is you can start to really understand, okay, where the current impacts and how it drives, through the dam, around the wing dam, and you start to really be able to picture the eddies in your mind.
Yeah,
to just
exactly. And once you get good at that, the nice thing is you can pull like almost any dam that I pull up to. I promise you I can go catch fish on it because I can look at it on Navionics, or if there's a decent map of the fishery, and see, based on the way the current comes out of there, 10 likely places where the fish are going to be. And once you get there, then you narrow down exactly how they're sitting on that spot. And, it's just a blast. I enjoy it more than any other kind of fishing, is getting down the fishing river. I've got my puppy dog here.
I am going to throw up a screen that has, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Pascal's river system right here. Okay. And what you have is this main, and it's huge. It looks like it's enormous, very similar to Chickamauga in that sense. Like, I don't really have these styles of rivers by me. You have a huge river that dumps down into this other river, and here is your dam system.
Okay, I was going to say, it looked like there's multiple dams there. It's interesting.
Yeah, looks like there's a ton of dams. Like one here, one here. I don't know if this is a dam or this is just a...
It might be like a jetty or something that blocks off from one to the next. One thing I'm noticing right now, just looking at that, and it could just be that it doesn't have a great map made of it, but there's not like a really defined channel. Do you notice that? There's not a super defined area where that water's coming out. You see two deep areas below the dam, but it's kind of, there's like a ton of underwater humps and islands there. So what I would do is I would get out on the tips of all those little humps and kind of like peninsula points and saddles and start idling there and figure out where the fish like to sit there based on the current.
Yeah, because there's not really a defined channel as you would.
Exactly. So it almost seems like the current would scatter, which can be really cool because it enables the fish to sit in a ton of different areas.
Yeah, like you
can
have
get out there, and the nice thing is that a place like that, fish is large. And once you figure out, one thing to learn, to narrow that down quickly is to figure out a depth range that you're seeing most of the bait and the fish. So say you're looking on there and it looks like there's a lot of areas that are 15 foot. Well, you pull up to one spot near the dam, it's 15 foot, and you immediately start marking bait on your graph and you catch a few fish there. Well, it's like, okay, I need to disregard a lot of the other humps and islands. I need to find some of the ones that are in the same kind of amount of current and in the same depth range. And you should be able to, it looks like there's multiple spots in just about every case.
Yeah.
Where you can be able to bounce around and recycle schools.
You have deep water. There's a ton of channels, little peninsulas that stick out. Like you have obviously your hardest channel right here, right?
Yeah.
Out of that, it pretty much scatters out. Your current impacts right here, it looks like, and then just basically breaks up. So you have this hard turn right here.
And you see right below where you're at, see that long point? It actually is a saddle between the two there. So zoom back in.
Yep.
All right, follow that out. See the saddle?
Then you have the saddle right
there. So on either side of that could be dynamite. And then if you pull back a little further down, like towards the bottom of the screen, there's going to be inside turns right there, a little above that. Yeah, there.
This hard turn right here.
Yeah, so you got those turns, and on the other side, it's the same thing. So you can fish those turns. And what I would do is, spend some time, especially during low current, find some time to get over there when they're not pushing a lot of water, when your electronics can really play for you. Start marking on those areas, on those turns, where are the rock piles? Because a lot of times there's rock and that's going to be in those areas that's caused them not to be, I guess, eroded by all that current.
Yeah.
You get on those rock areas, you start looking for ones that have different size boulders. That can be a huge thing in the tail race, is looking at the size of the boulders that are down there. Sometimes they want to be on the really small stuff. Sometimes they want to be on the big stuff. So all those can help you narrow down patterns and narrow down where to catch the fish.
Yeah, and I'm curious really how much, it looks like the current's going to play basically all the way through this thing.
Yeah, to me, that tail race almost looks like it ends right. Keep going to the left. Keep going to the left.
Right here. But this looks like.
Yeah, down in there is where that tail race would kind of end.
Yeah.
Where it filters out into the main lake and gets super deep right there.
Yeah. But what's cool, man, it's so patternable. Like, this is one of those areas where I feel like you could really start to put a pattern together.
And you look in those creeks right there, those deep creeks. I bet those could be awesome, like pre-spawn, at the mouths of those things. I bet those fish load up into there and then they push back and they spawn there. So you got a whole population of fish. Like a lot of our fish, they have to move a pretty fair distance from the tail race in order to spawn. So there's like a migration that occurs. So certain times of the year it can be a little bit more difficult to stay on the fish. These fish can live there. They don't have to go far.
Yeah, and far is relative, because this looks enormous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it's very manageable if you start to break it down.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, that's cool. I appreciate Pascal sending that over, but
thank you. That looks like a cool lake to fish. I wonder what's the primary species there.
I don't know if it's smallmouth or large.
Yeah, I think it'd be smallmouth, wouldn't it?
I would
have spotted bass in there. I don't know.
Back.
But did it say Ontario there?
Yeah, Quebec. So that's way up in Canada.
Yeah, probably not spotted bass up there. What's the highest lakes that you can think of that have spotted bass? It doesn't seem like y'all get many of them up there.
I don't think there's that many. I wonder what it would do. I'd probably decimate the smallmouth population.
Yeah, a lot of management places, like, they try to keep the spots out of certain areas because they breed like crazy with the smallmouth, and you have meanmouths, which are awesome. I don't know why they get so ticky about it, but it seems like it's funny. I don't ever hear of any spotted lakes, very high, but they do great around here in cold water. So
yeah,
you'd think that they would spread more, but I guess they don't.
Now, how much of like small river fishing do you do? Right, we're talking like mega massive bodies of water, but
yeah.
How much, like, small river fishing do you do that we can start to?
I do a lot of that, especially in the summertime. Like when it's dog days of summer, I was talking about, like, I don't ledge fish at that point. I go night fishing. If I'm hunting monsters, I'm going night fishing. Hey, Friday. I've been sitting here needing some loving. Dad's been gone all day.
Heck yeah.
Get down, you little knucklehead. I do it a lot in the summertime. So during your dog days of summer, there's one or two things happen. So you get your fish to go ultra deep main lake on these ledges, and then you get fish that run way, 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 way up your tributaries. A lot of times,
very skinny water, like ridiculously skinny water.
Yeah, really skinny water. But what happens is, again, being that we're kind of like on a limestone basin, you have cool water that gets pumped into these rivers through the mountains, through the springs and stuff like that. Yep. And one thing that's really telling and that really kind of turned us onto this pattern is all your big striper go back in the creeks. You go way back in there. So you'll run back in. I mean, Tristan, my son, he caught a 42-pound striper last year.
That's so
back, I mean, like miles back into a creek in super skinny water. The creek was 30 feet across back there.
Dude, that's crazy.
But giant bass do that too. And so like when you're talking like end of July, August, September, that's a great place to go monster hunting. You don't get it's not like loaded. You don't get a ton of bites usually. And it's funny because it's either going to be a little one or it's going to be a meg. There's really nothing in between. You just don't you go to the ledges to catch 3 to 5 pounders. If you want to catch a 10, go to the creek.
See, that's how I hear. Like even on this river by my house, the Tittabawassee River, which has the tridge on it. What happens during the middle of summer is those fish will basically take and they'll pull out of the deep areas, and you can catch maybe 1 or 2, but they're not typically very big. Yeah. And they'll way up these areas into skinny water because it's a little bit cooler coming out of the dams. Yeah. And they'll get into like the holes and they'll group up, and you can catch either a ton of like cookie cutters or a real big one.
Just randomly too. Sometimes you'll be like 12-incher. You're like, oh, never mind. 8. Yeah. You're like, what the heck happened?
And I just think it's really interesting to, because rivers fish almost super predictable. Like when you get up these small rivers, you're like, there should be a fish right there.
I tell you an amazing tip that actually my buddy Chris, the guy that does the Bass Attitude, he taught me. And one thing I had trouble. See, the thing is when you're talking about, especially dog days of summer, those fish, they move a ton in those creeks. Like they migrate in and out based on what's happening. I tell you, the first thing to do is like be whipping down through there and start getting right on the bank. Put your boat on the bank while you're idling through there and look. If you're not seeing bluegill, don't even stop and fish. Ride back there. Do not stop until you start seeing shad or bluegill. And then you start, because it narrows it down. Because what I was doing before, I was still fishing fast, but I'd pull into this area and be like, okay, this is a good spot. Boom. And I'd fish 30 yards. Boom. Move on. Stop. Fish 30 yards. Stop. Keep going. And like I would end up wasting, I guess, throughout the course of the day, you fish 3 creeks like that. As long as it takes to get back in there, you're wasting hours.
Yep.
Like you get in there, you literally put that thing on idle. Once you get back into the creek where you want to be, just run until you start seeing bait fish, something that's forage. Don't stop. As soon as you do, stop. And 9 times out of 10, there'll be a stretch. We talk about cutting creeks into thirds. You can cut little canals and stuff into sections too. And so you'll find like, for 300 yards, there'll be a load of fish. On different things. So you start breaking down from there. And as soon as you stop, if you're trolling on back, as soon as you stop seeing bait, turn around, come right back out and start fishing the other side of it or something.
There's so much like tidbit information that I just get throughout this entire thing. Like, even you and Dirds are like 2 of the most analytical fishermen that I fish with, right? And it may be like not like super analytical to you guys, but to me it's like, holy smokes, like why did I never think of this? But talking about breaking rivers down, breaking current driven bodies of water down, when we were fishing Smallwood, which is where we caught all those fish skipping jigs and throwing the swim jig and everything, we would get to this point where we're like,
one little body of water. You have so many cool little bodies of water.
So many cool small reservoirs, right?
Yeah.
But we get like a halfway into the creek and we're like, oh, well, they stopped, so let's get back out of here and go into this next creek. Away, we'll go halfway into that and then go out and talking about really breaking it down and understanding where fish are specifically positioned in the creek arms and in the areas that you're fishing. So it just really unique perspective on how to think about breaking that down. And I want to really touch on how to fish small reservoirs because that's what I have around me. You've kind of fished it a little bit, but understanding that even in cold water, a lot of times that cold water is going to draw these fish to the deepest parts of that body of water, which tend to be the main river or main lake area.
But you got to think too, even though it's easier to target them in that area.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times. I mean, today some of the fish that we caught, the big ones, dirt shallow.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's, I mean,
and even ultra cold, you know, like I've told you before, there's been days when I do fish like the mid part of the lake, I'll run up into these flats and I do the same thing that we're talking about in little tiny creeks. You run up the flat, you get in the secondary channel, and you go until it gets shallower and shallower and shallower. And I'm not going to stop until I start seeing little roll, you know, little activity, whether it's little white bass, little crappie, gizzard shad that are rolling around in there. And then that's when you stop and you start to fish. Now, I've had it. I'm talking literally like portions of the lake frozen over, portions of the flat frozen over, and caught, you know, 30-pound bags burning a rattle trap in like 2 foot of water.
Which is
I mean, that's the only way they want it. Like, literally, you couldn't reel it fast enough.
What are those conditions that make you say, okay, I'm going to fish dirt shallow right now? Because to me,
it all comes down to what you're seeing. And that's why, you know, we sit here and we get all analytical and we look at all the random things. But at the end of the day, there's the obvious stuff. Like, you need to keep your eyes up, you know, learn to use your trolling motor without looking at it. Don't keep your eye constantly on your graphs and stuff. Look up, see what's happening. If you're fishing outside of a channel and you've drifted 60 yards over some good stuff, have not gotten bit, and you look 2 foot of water on the other side of the flat right there, and you start seeing gizzard shad roll around, I don't care if it's spitting snow and, you know, if the water temp's 43 degrees, your butt needs to be over there where the gizzard shad are. I mean, it's things. If you start seeing, you know, herons diving over there, you know, or seagulls diving, you better get over there. You know, that it all boils down to that. And looking at every fish that you catch, you know, this time of year, the fish will tell you right away. I mean, you'll catch a fish, and you look down his stomach and you see antennas. You're like, oh, I just caught that fish. It just ate a crawfish recently. And then you look and you're like, oh, there's a shell bed, but it's got a little bit more chunk rock on it. I've got 13 other marks over here on my waypoint. I'm going to start throwing a football jig down through there, and pretty soon you have yourself a pattern. It's just paying attention all the time.
I think of all the things that we talk about, because you said it best, man. We talk about this is the condition where you should be doing this and it should be happening. But what you just said, just keep your eyes open, pay attention to what's actually going on, because we in our minds tell something.
But sometimes it makes zero sense. It makes zero sense. Like, so today when we're out there fishing, my dad and I, all day long, all the BFL guys are running all over the lake. Every one of them, they're fishing in the backs of the creeks, all the way out through the creeks. And like I already told you, there's no water in these creeks. But the water temp in there, you know, we had this rain, this warm rain. The water temp back there is like 55 degrees, you know, 57 degrees. And I'm like, it looks great. And then you get out Main Lake and it's 43. And you're like, there's no reason I should be fishing here, right?
Yeah.
You get back in the creek and you're seeing crappie everywhere. You're seeing bait. You're seeing clouds of bluegill. But what you're not seeing is gizzard shad. It's a whole segment. Like, these big fish are keyed in on gizzard shad. They don't give a crap about the crappie. They don't give a crap about the bluegill. And they don't mind sitting in that ridiculously cold water.
That's
and
crazy.
They will sit there. They will sit there and not move into the creek. Even if the creek's 60 degrees, they don't care. They would rather sit in the 43-degree water. And it's because, I mean, these fish are like ridiculously obese. And they're sitting in a seam where they don't have to work at all. And the sun is beaming down on mud bank. So, you know, right there where they're at, they're probably sitting there in, you know, 10 to 15 foot. And it's like this, a little bit of radiant heat hitting them down there. They're not having to swim at all. Like, they've got it made. And everybody's trying to, you know, they're doing all the things that you think are the right thing to do. Like, if you go up there and look, like, these are, and I'm not dogging these guys. These are a bunch of hammer anglers that are coming to fish. And I'm doing something that doesn't make sense at all. And that's what's successful.
It's crazy to me, man. Like, the amount of knowledge and experience you have, not only out there, but just like on Nickajack. And basically, man, you can take your experience and come up here and smash them, right?
Yeah.
And what's cool to me is just hearing you start to, I don't want to say like ditch the conventional knowledge, but pay attention to things other people aren't paying attention to. And I think that's what makes a good river angler or a good reservoir fisherman, is you have to be adaptable.
You just don't be afraid of anything.
Right.
And don't like Chris and I joke all the time. Like I read this in Bassmaster, so it's got to work. Like that's all great, and there's awesome information out there everywhere. But at the end of the day, keep it basic. One thing that Chris and I have learned over the years is the big fish that you want to catch, they sit on the most obvious structure. And you'll go back to these spots. I mean, like, I'm talking like you'll see a stretcher bank and you'll see a dock that sits out further than the other ones. Like, it's so obvious. Like, if I was a big fish, I would be there. Or you're on a point and there's like 2 stumps at the end of the point. I would be there if I was a big fish. Literally, that's where that fish is sitting. It's the dominant fish. It's going to sit in the easiest place to sit where the most food is, period.
Yeah.
The thing is, how are you going to get over there in a spot that everyone can see is an obvious place to catch a fish and fool that fish? That's where you start thinking outside the box. But I think the beginning part of it is just keep it basic. I mean, like, the fish are going to be in the obvious place. They're going to be in the obvious part of the current. You might not think it because you might not be catching that fish. At that point, it's a you problem. Finding the fish is not terribly hard most of the time. Like, they're going to be around the right kind of bait. You figure out what kind of forage your fish are on, what they're eating. You find that forage. You find obvious places around the area where that forage is. And chances are, if there's 10 places that look like they would hold a monster on it, those 10 places have a monster on it. You just haven't figured out how to fool them into eating it yet. It's a lineup. It's a certain cast. It's a way that I mean, we get ridiculous on some of these. Like, we fish glide baits all the time. So there's like stupid things that you do. Like, in order to catch this fish off of this tree, you have to start at this certain angle and glide up to a waypoint. And then you have to shut your trolling motor off and not touch it so that you continue to push forward. Then you got to make a cast at a certain time. And as you're drifting with the current down here, that's when you juke it when you get over the tree. And
at a certain angle.
Like time after time after time, clockwork after that. But until you figure that out, I mean, it's maddening.
To hear Caleb break this down, I know a lot of you guys are like, man, it's not that hard. It's not that serious. Dude, I was in the boat with Chris and Caleb. We were on Parksville. And Chris was like, okay, see that tree on the point? There's a giant on that. And I'm like, dude, it is the most obvious spot in the lake. Like, it is the spot where there's a fish. He's like, there is a giant there. We got up there, sure enough. He's like, okay, let off your trolling motor right now. So I stopped touching the trolling motor. Chris cast the glide bait up there, first cast, and had this fish follow it to the boat. Now, we didn't get it to commit. Like, I don't know really what the problem was. I was positioned wrong. But it really is.
That's when you start to expound, too. It's like, okay, I know that fish is there. You can go back there the next day and come at him, like, put the boat on the bank and make that cast again, and he might fire. I mean, I can't tell you how many times Chris and I have gone back, like, 3 days in a row to a log in the back of a creek and, like, that a 10-pounder's on, and then, like, day 3 is when you get her to bite because we're not doing the same thing every time. Like, we know these fish are territorial. They're going to find the best spot to sit. And a lot of times it's not like they're going to be moving unless they're in a transition phase. If it's summer or if it's winter, their butts camped down right there. They're not going anywhere. Go back to that spot and don't do the same thing. Don't throw the same bait. Don't do the same lineup. Do something different. And chances are within the first, the nice thing with the glide bait or when you have Panoptix like you have is that you can see the fish and see the size of the fish and see them react. And then you can, change your plans based on that. When you can't, say if that brush pile's in 15 foot of water and you don't have Panoptix, you're literally, all this is happening in your mind.
Yes.
So you're pulling up, this day you come from this angle, the wind's this angle, the current's coming this way. You fire in there, nothing happens. You might try 2 or 3 different baits. Nothing happens. Maybe you get bit and you're like, you know what? The way that fish ate just kind of tells me it was probably the kind of fish that I'm after.
Yeah.
And so the next time you come and you hit it from a different angle, you do something different. And then all of a sudden, one of those times you'll go through there and you'll catch 2 or 3 of them. And a lot of times there's more than one in these areas. It's like, and you can come back. Once you figure it out, year after year after year is the crazy thing. You can come back there, and once you figure out the Krabby Patty formula or whatever you want to call it, go back there, and literally, as long as you remember it, you can do the same thing over and over. And it's so funny because you can do it in areas like the most obvious areas of the lake that are pounded the most and consistently go back and catch the kind of fish that you want to catch off of areas that 50 guys have thrown that day.
Yep.
But those are the 50 guys that went through and they just threw. And they might have got that bite. And they might have, saw that fish, but they were like, well, it's not biting, so I'm just going to continue on my way. It's the guy that sits there and it's just like being sick in the head, like you cannot stop until you figure it out. Like I last year in Party Cove, there were some fish that were schooling in there, massive fish, all over the place. And I sat there for 4 days straight, getting my head kicked in, just sitting there watching mega fish schooling around the boat, not catching anything, and finally figured out the stupid fish were eating a floating fly. This is talking like fall transition, stupid hot out. They won't touch anything, and you can take a little tiny fluke on an 1/8-ounce head with a bobber and throw it out there and catch 25 pounds. Like
Talk about the importance. So there were a bunch of questions about float and fly before you hopped on here. It just kind of like, I don't know if there was a video about float and flies recently, but people were blowing it up about float and flies.
Oh gosh, dude! I've caught on Chickamauga. I've got tons of bags in the high 20s and tons of bags in the low 20s. Like it is literally stupid the amount of big fish the last few years that I've caught on a float and fly, and no one throws it. No one.
Insane.
Because the float and fly mystique, what we think about float and fly conditions, you think about upland reservoirs, highland reservoirs, you think about extremely clear water, you think about tiny little flies, and you think about, dropping that thing anywhere, on a slit float, sometimes 10, 12, 14, 20 feet deep, right? That's the stigma in your head. But then you break that out. I have always, since I was a kid, I've been fishing a float and fly, right? That's why Chris and I joke, we call it the old man rig, because that's what I used to do with my grandfather. And the only reason I tried this, literally, I was so, out of it. I literally picked up a crappie jig, an oversized crappie jig, and I tied it on because it was like my last hope. I'm like, you know what? This time of year, I remember being out with my grandfather and, trolling around in a 10-foot John boat and catching the heck out of fish behind guys on just a bobber and a jig, just thinking that you're going to catch crappie or panfish or something. It's like you're always going to catch something. But
yep. It
is amazing, given the right circumstances, how deadly it is on huge fish. I mean, I think the record caught in California is 18 pounds on a floating fly. Dude. I mean, the right kind of fish, I can't tell you how many 8s, how many 6s, the amount of 6s, especially in 7-pound class, is stupid. And several 8s. I haven't caught a 10 on one yet, but I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, heck, last year Cole and I, he caught a 16-pound rockfish on a floating fly.
What is the draw to the floating fly? Just supernatural presentation?
Exactly. So the draw, and what makes it so effective on highly pressured fish is it looks like an injured bait fish. You can match the hatch. You can go, I've fished up to 4-inch, 5-inch baits on a floating fly before. But it's even more effective on super finicky fish than a jerkbait is. It hangs there. They literally cannot get it out of their face. It's just like when I'm crappie fishing. I'm sitting there and I throw that thing out and I'm just wiggling the tip of my rod like this. I'm literally, that cork's just doing this in the water. And I'm barely creeping. I'm crawling it back to the boat. And once you know where fish are, so, when they're schooling, it's easy, right? The areas, and the key is when they're schooling is you don't want to cast to where the fish are schooling, right? You don't do that. If you want to catch them on that floating fly, you want to catch them when no one else can, figure out where they sit before they school. Because they're not dropping down after they school right in that same spot. They're positioning in an area so that they can ambush in that area. That's their ambush point. That's their feeding point. Where do they sit when they're inactive, waiting to feed? That's where you throw your floating fly. And you better go on tight because you can literally sit there for 30 minutes and catch them one after another.
That is so sneaky.
But that's the thing. I'm telling you, and I've already, this year up on these river fish, already caught a couple 20-pound bags on it. It's outfished a jerkbait several days for me.
That is so
it's literally, you're throwing that thing in there and you're working it back on super light line. Usually for me, light line is 8-pound test, but up there, on a lot of other reservoirs like Parksville and stuff, you can crush on Parksville right now with a floating fly. You can crush on nickajack. You can go down the same banks that where if they're not hitting a crankbait and if they're not hitting a jerkbait, you can throw that float and fly and just let it drift down the seam. A lot of times you don't even have to move it. It'll just go to a certain point and just go under. It's like 3 and 4 pound smallmouth. It's ridiculous. And no one, it's like everyone's too cool to get out of bobber now. You know, it's like we got our $50 glide baits, we got our $100 glide baits, we got our $25 megabass jerk bait. No one thinks, okay, pull out a 5-cent lead head with a 2-cent little minnow bait on the back with a 80-cent bobber, and you're going to sit there. I mean, those frostbite tournaments I was winning last year, it was hilarious because no one could catch them.
What's the deepest you'll fish that?
Oh gosh, for me, it's been most effective fished anywhere from 3 foot to about 7 foot. But if you're on Parksville, 7 to 10 foot is pretty common. And again, you're using a slip float, and when I use my bobber stops, I use the ones that tie. They hold really well.
Okay.
And so, a lot of guys talk about weighting their slip float. I've never had to do that. Like, I use one that has a weight in it on this end. So if I get a lift bite, it'll just lay over outside anyway. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't completely lay over like a lot of the actual float and fly floats that people customize do, but it goes, it'll be sitting there like this, and instead of just dipping down, it'll go, and I know something's up, and I'll reel down. Just kind of ease into them. Dude. But you need to try that up there, dude, because I bet you could slay.
Spring.
Oh my gosh, dude. It might open up a whole new life to you. I gotta say,
Durds and I have already been tying some flies.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. A lot of guys, another stigma is a fly, right?
Yeah.
Get yourself, I'll send you some. I'm going to send you some of the sickle hooks that I use. It's like a little bit bigger crappie hook. And then use a Zoom tiny fluke or a gulp minnow, the same thing that guys tight line with, right? Bro.
That's it.
Say no more. I mean, just hold on tight because it's stupid. Like, you go out one day and you're like, oh, yeah, I caught, 22 pounds on beaver yesterday. It was pretty great. And then you go out in the float and fly and catch like 26. And you're like, oh, this is dumb.
Yeah, beaver just got stupid.
So fun, medium light spinning rod, 6 pound test. And you're like, oh, yeah.
Dude, I'm going to throw it on that. Oh, I got it. I'm already excited.
Get them, bro. Get them.
Okay, so we're going to take a couple questions, and then we'll probably hop off here. But one of the questions from Logan Sullivan says, where do fish go in the early spring on small rivers, 40 to 50 degree water temp?
40 to 50 degree water early spring. So we're talking, I call that like the late winter or transition phase. Yeah, a lot of times it'll change. So your little ditch mouse on the river. So you still want to be up high in the river most of the time because that's going to be your most stable water temperatures, right? And that's where the fish are going to be kind of congregated in an area where you can easily target them. In other words, there's only going to be certain areas they can be. But you will notice as like for us, as it moves into February and March, the fish, instead of being spread way down a river bank or a stretch, they start to condense around ditch mouths, around the places that they are eventually going to use to migrate into spawning areas. So what I would say is, and it has nothing to do with water temperature. It's mostly moon phase and time of year. You'll start to figure it out on your body of water. It could be, it's weird. Like our fish, it might be 42 degree water temps, have a huge cold front move in, and then all of a sudden that's when they all decide to flood up shallow.
Yeah. So for the
55 degree water temperatures like a week before. It's all a timing thing.
Up here in Michigan,
narrow down around the ditch mouse, around the creek mouse, and get ready. And then as the water, warms up enough, they'll start to funnel in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And up here in Michigan, that's typically around like the second, third week of May.
Yeah.
Depending on
one thing, here's a really good tip for anybody that's fishing a river system. When you're fishing structure on there, learned this years and years ago fishing duck blinds on river systems. If you're fishing brush, if you're fishing a creek mouth, 9 times out of 10, don't ask me why, the fish do not sit right on the structure. They don't sit right in the creek mouth. They don't sit right on you would think, a duck blind, you've got like this beautiful structure. They would sit right next to it, right? No, they're always 15 yards ahead of it or 15 yards below it every single time. And same thing with creek mouths. If you're fishing creek mouths, you better start 30 to 50 yards above it, and you better fish 30 to 50 yards below it. That's rule of thumb. And 9 times out of 10, somewhere between 10 and 30 to 50 yards below or above that is where the mother lode is. And 90% of guys are never going to make a cast at them. They're going to go fish right in front and right below, and then they're done. But the real fish, the megs, I mean, heck, that 11 I caught today was 30 yards below a creek mouth.
So why are they already there in January?
It's an easy, for right now, it's a feeding area. So like, remember I was telling you, these warm pockets and stuff like that, the bass are not running into there because there's no water in them, but it's warmed up. And so there's a ton of little bluegill, there's crappie, and there's gizzard shad in there. So what do? They sit out at the ambush point. So when those fish filter in and out, they get washed above and below. And when the current's kicking, they just get kicked right down the edge, right? So those fish just hang out. It's
just a super easy spot for them.
Yeah, they surf the current. They don't have to work at all. And they just hang out there. I mean, it's so funny. Like, you would think, guys think about river fish, and we always talk about how strong they are because they have to work so hard in the current. Like, those fish don't work at all. They're the laziest fish ever. Like, they fight like the dickens whenever you catch them. But I mean, I figured out some largemouth below Nickajack Dam last year, and we literally could follow with a glide bait or a swim bait and follow these fish. So at the beginning of the day, they're running like 10,000 CFI, right?
Yeah.
And so there's barely any water coming out of the turbines. They'd be right there. And then they'd kick it up to 20. The fish would not kick their tail one time. They just let the current push them down to this rock pile, chill there until the current got kicked up to 30. And then they would just literally push them down to these big metal drums, right? And so the fish would be down through there. And then when they kick it up to 40 or 50, they wouldn't move at all. The current would create a backflow, and it would push them all the way back to where they started at the wing wall so they could do the whole song and dance again.
Dude, which is so funny. Like, if you guys have the opportunity to go to Nickajack, Chickamauga, or these, like, legendary giant reservoirs, these places are – it doesn't look big on a map.
Compared to what they'll have.
Yes, man. Like, I got to fish it with Caleb, who's, like, a hammer. But they're enormous. And like when he talks these cans, I mean, they're cans.
They're giant.
It's not like a can, like a buoy.
It's not like a Coke can.
They're huge.
They're massive. People, if they look up Google images, they can kind of see what I'm getting at there. But it's just so funny. You know, we fantasize, I guess, about what these fish think and what they do and how smart they are and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, they're just like a big deer. Like, a big deer is not going to, walk straight up a gulf and go over to get to the other side. He's going to pick the easiest dang way to walk up through there.
Yeah. So I got two more questions for us. So a dead chipmunk, he's been asking this question. He asked on Friday's live stream, and he asked it tonight. Yeah. And I've just never really been able to touch on it. What do you think of jointed lures? So jointed crankbaits. I think that's really what he's talking is like the effectiveness or the time of year where a jointed crankbait would work over others. And I know personally for me, I don't fish a jointed crankbait, so don't have a lot of like experience or.
Now, okay, so back in the day, one of the really good spawn baits, and it's still really good, we think about a floating Rapala or a Bangalore, right?
Yep.
The floating jointed Bangalores were a great spawn bait. And, I kind of showed you that up in Michigan, like the jerk bait on bedding fish. The original version of that was the Bangalore. It's basically a big floating jerk bait.
Yep.
It goes down through there. And that's deadly on spawning fish. And the same thing with the jointed version. I like the non-jointed version better just personally because I can rip it harder. But a lot of times, so many giant fish have been caught over the years on spawning fish that way. Other jointed baits, when you think about warmer months, burning baits, a jointed swim bait can be dynamite. We're talking like a bull shad, burning a bull shad over grass, burning a bull shad over fish that are shallow, over rocks in the river, something like that to get a reaction strike can be dynamite. And then, of course, our favorite, our good buddy, the glide bait, is a jointed bait. So jointed baits in general can be awesome. When you talk about adding a bill to it, I don't think it's always the best thing. It's very specific. When you're talking about like a jointed mid-range crankbait, to me that kind of defeats the purpose. A lot of times when I'm fishing that thing, that's going to get in the way of the action. They're not going to be able to work it fast enough, or it's going to be too much action.
There's too many moving parts there where that bait's going to kind of want to do weird things where you have to, it's built for a very specific purpose. Yeah. And you have
some jointed baits are really good. Some of these jointed baits that are supposed to be used as a like a jointed jerk bait, like we were talking about before, like a jointed bang lure.
Yep.
Some of them are dynamite wake baits, and you don't even know it. Like, especially if you start getting really big ones, like 7-inch, 8-inch, they can be dynamite wake baits. And it just depends on what brand and stuff. Smithwick made one, I think, that was a jointed. It's supposed to be like a jointed little jerk bait or whatever that you were supposed to float and use, but it was so buoyant. I mean, heck, you'd get that thing going. It had like a clack on it and everything. So it's one of those situational things, but I feel like it has less situations than other.
What is that jointed? Oh, man, what is the famous jointed wake bait? Theirs has one. I can see. Yes.
Slammer. Yeah, Slammer's dynamite, dude.
Yeah.
I took it out on a night fishing trip last year in the back of a creek over some grass.
Yeah.
It was amazing how like angry those fish will get at that thing.
Durden's has one where it like he's had to re-lacquer it.
Yeah.
It's just wood. Like
they're so expensive too. It's literally like it looks like a broom handle that somebody put a joint on. Like these like crappy joints. They're like screw in dang like places for your hook keepers and your line tie, and they're like $40 a piece. Like, dang, dude, I can make that.
Like you can't find them.
Yeah.
No, so kind of our overall thoughts on jointed lures. Diving crankbaits, it really kind of defeats the purpose. Like you just want the wiggle of the crankbait. Like it has a very specific reason that it acts that way. And then when you crank a crankbait, it's so versatile. You can do so many things. When you add the joint, kind of wants to make it do funny things. I think for topwater baits or very like shallow subsurface, like the Bango lure, or
it seems like anything that can be worked in less than 4 feet, it can be dynamite.
Yep, because you don't really have as much impact, and you're not typically moving that bait quite as fast. And then last question that we're going to touch on is just a little bit more on the float and fly. People are really, really excited here. What do you vary the weights that you throw at all? What's your go-to fly color? And
go-to fly, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but it is the Zoom Tiny Fluke Smoke and Shed is the go-to, and I use a hook that the guys at Saudi Custom Tackle make for me, and I crimp it a certain way. I crimp the barb down on it in a certain way to hold the shad on there better, and then I use a red hook, a red sickle hook. And if you run that right there, I pretty much guarantee you, anywhere I have taken it so far, I have smashed them on that thing.
And your
8-pound test, Mr. Crappie, green weighted float, slip float, the larger size, and I run it either an 1/8 or a 16th ounce head on that.
How do you choose head weight? Is it just
it just depends. You know, if I'm using if I really want that thing, you get a smaller flutter. You'll get, the bait will flutter down more. It'll go slower if you accidentally miss a hook set with a lighter weight. However, if you're working that thing a little quicker on more aggressive fish, the 1/8 ounce will keep it down in the strike zone longer. Another cool thing about the 1/8 ounce, if you use the smaller float, you can actually sink it, which is a deadly technique on the float and fly. I need to do a video on that because there's a whole genre of float and fly fishing that a lot of people don't do, and that's actually sinking your float intentionally. So you're working that thing. You can test depth that way if you're fishing a flat. So you can work your float and then let it sink so you can know if the water is relatively clear about how deep you're fishing and pick it back up. And so it's deadly because as soon as you start working that float again, it starts to rise. So you can actually rise and lower it in the water column.
How do you tinker this much to know?
It's dirty. It's dirty.
Much. I know
really that goes back to being a kid and crappie fishing and pan fishing. It was just like a dynamite technique that we figured out by accident, put on too heavy of a lead head one time, and then like doing that, I think it was my dad that reminded me my grandfather did that the first time, just start smashing us. And we're like, this is ridiculous. You have a stupid sinking floater. It's like that day that y'all started crushing me on the sinking dirt baits at Beaver. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's still doing this, but it's just taking this slow. And you watch your line because the braid is still floating. So even if the float gets completely out of sight, I'll have my float set at 6 foot and sometimes fish that down 12 foot and just let it slowly go. And then it'll go down there and you'll watch your line go like that and just reel up, swing into.
That's so, dude.
It's
There
nasty.
is-
And I'm telling you, you're going to crush on that this year. If you'll do it, if you'll take some time to figure out like how to apply it, I bet Dirds will do it. I guarantee you, he'll get into it.
Dirds is going to nerd on it.
I will be eternally surprised if y'all can't bust a lot of limits over 20 pounds with it.
Yeah, especially during weird months when stuff gets real.
Yeah. I mean, those times when they're on that jerkbait, if they're on a jerkbait, it's one of the others working better, but they're both working. I promise you.
One of the biggest things, especially during the middle of the summer, is those fish will get out there and they'll suspend, and you're just waiting. You're just waiting for one to swim down the break, right? You fish the glacial lakes. You fish these other glacial lakes and you fish. You're waiting for these fish to cruise down, suspended down that break because they're just wolf packs.
Yeah,
dude.
I'm telling you, with the Panoptix too. See, that's the key with the floating fly. It sucks for covering water. Like you need to know where
if you have spots. Like if you have,
if you have a spot. But the cool thing about Panoptix is it doesn't matter. So say you're doing like we do on those glacial lakes. You're going down through there. You fire the LV500 in there. You yo-yo it. Fish does nothing. Fire the jerkbait in there. Fish kind of comes up to it, does nothing. You fire that floating fly in there, and then you just leave it in front of his face. And just barely put your rod tip, and that thing's doing this right in front of his face. They cannot take it. Because it's like, even if they don't want it, if it sits there long enough in their space, they're like, oh my gosh, will you please leave?
Yeah, please move this thing.
Yeah.
Is it above the fish then?
Yeah. Most of the time you want it to be just above the fish. And that's where the sinking float comes in too, is you can shelf it off. So you know how, like, if you're ice fishing guys talk about like making it rise.
Yep.
And then you make it fall, and that triggers the fish too, but almost always they bite on the rise. Think about this: when you're doing the sinking float, you got that fish on Panoptix, you start sinking that float. So the bait's above him, he's not really reacting to it, so you start sinking it on him. You don't touch it at all. Well, then he starts trying to react. He starts to close that distance. Then you start barely working it, and all of a sudden that bait starts to rise again, but it's still staying in the same area. He's not going to be able to take it. I can tell you that right now.
Dude, I cannot wait. I'm so excited, man.
Yeah, it's going to crush.
Anyways, dudes, we are going to end this thing right here. If you guys are listening on the podcast, this is up on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all of the other streaming services. So you guys can go check it out over there. Check out all of the past episodes. I've converted some videos on lipless crankbaits, hair jigs. I have some videos coming on jerk baits and some other topics that I've done in the past. I hope you guys enjoy these. Checking them out on the podcast platform, or you can join us on these live streams that are going to be coming out on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, we did this again. That's a blast.
Mr. Caleb Bell, thank you so much for joining us. It was a blast, man. You're just so much knowledge and so many little tidbits that I hope people pick up on, because there's just insane.
That's the fun part to me. It's just like, and I know it's the same thing for you. And anyone who really loves to fish, like, the puzzle is the most fun part. Like, catching fish is a blast, smashing them is a blast. But like when you figure it out and it's not an accident, like it's just plain hard work and perceptiveness, that when you figure the fish out, like there's hardly anything more rewarding than that. Like you don't need somebody's spot. You don't need a waypoint or anything. It's just you going out there, reading what's happening and working your butt off until you figure out how to make it work and stuff. And that's the fun part.
I guess there's one more thing I just want to touch on real quick. Take 30 seconds. Give me your favorite baits for cold water current situations.
Ooh, cold water current situations. One of the number one ones that you wouldn't think of is actually like a hollow body paddle tail swim bait, like a 5 or 6 inch. Sometimes a 4 inch can be dynamite too. And on the head size varies completely depending on the situation, how much current. If you're in a lot of current, it might be 3/4 of an ounce. If you're in minor current, it might be a 1/4 ounce, but usually it's in between that range. A jerk bait. And here's one tip for you. There is usually a silent, for me, or a deep diving jerk bait are the ones that I'm after. One or the other. I wish they made more silent deep diving jerk baits, because that's a dynamite pattern. When everyone's throwing jerk bait at a fish, you start throwing a silent one at them, it can be dynamite. And another thing with jerk baits, we could talk all day about that, but sinking the jerk bait, like we talked about. But anyway, so jerk bait, hollow body swim bait, so what we call a single swim bait here. And then Alabama rig, and this is in order too, by the way. Alabama rig for super cold water, and then fourth, but one that I absolutely smash on is going to be some kind of a lipless bait, whether that is a loud, rattling, heavy bait like a LV500 or a blade bait that's quiet and inobtrusive. If you have those 4, you're going to crush. You add in the float and fly. That's all the 5 rods that you're going to need on your deck. You might want 10 rods so you can have variations on each, but I promise you, with those, you're going to be fine.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. And Sean Lai says flop on the trap. He's watching you guys.
Dude, flopping the trap. Dude, that's such an epic pattern that no one does.
I know.
That's the same thing, the aggravation factor. It's like, why is that thing just sitting in the same spot?
Caleb doesn't tell you. Caleb and nerds are the same. They figure out something. They'll beat you out, and then they'll give you a little clue. And then the next day, they're like, yeah, just so you know, figure out, flop that trap instead of lifting it. And I'm like, but you're right.
Dirty.
It goes back to just teaching. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoyed. Learn something from this. As always, thank you for watching. Take care, Ted Lance. God bless. Pursue passion.
Peace out, guys. Good luck out there.